Senior Technical Consultant at Dell EMC. So you picked the right topic. You don't want to be sold anything today since I'm talking about Github, and that's not what I do. Quick standard disclaimer. When I say how awesome something is, it means in most cases that thing is awesome. You may find a reason why it's not awesome. You may find severed red lines, all perpendicular, some in transparent ink. So if you get that reference, it just says I'm not an expert. So, I'm learning this along the way. I think it's something that's important for people to learn. So I'm here to share sort of that journey and that knowledge that I've gained with everyone. I wanted to start with more of a why, right? Why do you need to learn GitHub? And not from a technical perspective, not because the developers in my organization use it, not because I've got some project that I want to work on and I need to do. The projector keeps doing this, my apologies. It'll come back in a second. So I really wanted to focus on why. And if the screen ever comes back, there's a link on the bottom from a TED Talk from someone named Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He gives a lot of really good talks on different topics. Yes, no, maybe so. It's going to cycle through all of them this time. It'll go. There we go. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about why. There's this quote, which is now, it's 2017, so 6 years old roughly. In short, software is eating the world. Right, so software is really changing what we're doing. Companies are more and more relying on software for their job, where they might not be a technology company, or not have been considered a technology company 5 or 10 years ago, but everything that you do now, everything that even a construction company does, there's this reliance on technology that's only going to continue to increase. We talked about the biggest companies in the world, not that we necessarily all work for those, but it's changed, right? Product companies, oil companies, banks, that has shifted. The biggest companies in the world aren't manufacturing products anymore. They're not making gas, they're writing software. They're writing things that don't exist without, a phone or a tablet or a computer. Even to the point where a couple of them that were up there, and I lost the screen again, so I'll read you the quote. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no hotels. Software. These companies have grown their multi-billion, if not billion-dollar companies based on code, right? Writing code and making that available for people to consume. So really what I'm trying to get to is that, big companies, right? We don't all work for 60,000 person companies. I spent 15 years at companies that were a couple hundred people. But even those companies today, construction companies, small local banks, a bank isn't a bank anymore. A bank is a technology company. Are you going to use open a checking account with somebody that doesn't have an app or a website for you to manage your balances, to pay bills online? So even a bank is more of a technology company today. Granted, they're using it to make money. But their business relies on technology. It relies on somebody developing a product, some piece of software that their users and their customers can consume. So maybe you work for a company that doesn't have a reliance on technology right now. Oh, that's all right. You work for a company today. Maybe it's a construction company, maybe it's a physical goods company. I don't need technology, right? We don't deploy code, I don't have developers, I don't have QA that I interact with. And that might be fine, and that might get you a few years. Heck, you might even work for a VAR who makes their money going out and deploying vSphere, VRA, NSX, the different technologies that businesses do need. You might have a solid career in that for the next 5 or 10 years, but your next job, our job as IT administrators, as IT engineers, are going away. More and more. Has anyone here ever made their living doing just Active Directory administration? Do you still make a living doing just Active Directory administration? Exchange, another popular one, SQL, right? All things that over the years I've made a living on doing nothing but AD implementation and administration, doing Exchange implementations and administration, supporting SQL servers. They're like bullet points on the bottom of the job posting right now. Right? Companies are assuming that those skills, those products have matured to a point where they can be used by most anyone with a decent set of technical skills. So if you went on LinkedIn and you looked for a job, an IT administrator job, there's not a lot of those jobs around here. I did it the other day, 19 of them. IT admin jobs. Okay, maybe you're more on the engineering side, putting this stuff together and trying to figure out where, how to make SQL and IIS work together, something a little more complex. Is it the cable?
I've got the guy coming.
A couple more of those. There's 26 of those, right? So maybe you've got you've got a little more of a chance between the other. I don't know how many people are here today. Probably over 1,000.
Yeah.
So you're competing just in this area with people that know about this conference with 1,000 other people for 26 jobs. We look for DevOps, 644 jobs. So your chances have just dynamically shot up by having a new set of skills around this thing we call DevOps. And one of those things that you're going to need to learn, one of the foundation pieces of it, is GitHub. Not that GitHub means you're doing DevOps, and I'll get to that in a minute. But even if some of those jobs are developer jobs, right? I'm not a lead software developer. I'm never going to be. So if we even filter down and look more specifically in like the IT field, there's still 148 jobs out there as of that screenshot, right? And that's been pretty consistent. I was searching for a job for a little while, and there's just, if you're not working for a VAR, people aren't looking for VMware admins or VMware engineers anymore. They're looking for people that understand how to manage and manipulate and move software from A to B. Right, to take it from a developer, whether it's your company that's developing it, whether it's an outsourced company that's developing it, and deliver that to the organization in a way that our applications are available. So really the why for me, why I got involved, Chris brought up commitments, which was something that a friend of mine, Matt Roberg started 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 Christmases ago. To get people comfortable with using GitHub. So when I finish up rambling on why I think you should learn it, I'm going to go over some of the basics, some of the key commands that you can take. And this afternoon at lunch, if you've got a laptop, when you get back to the office tomorrow, you can create a GitHub repo. You can put your scripts in there. You can start to manage these files and get comfortable with it to the point where you can go have a conversation. You can start doing more with GitHub and maintaining and managing scripts, code, configuration for switches and routers and firewalls, things like that. So back to that why, right? Why I believe in it is because I believe my career depends on it. I would absolutely love to be at the beach right now. I would prefer not to be going back to the office this afternoon or tomorrow, but I've got to do this for at least 20 more years, probably. So I know that this is a skill set that I need to be comfortable with. And I'm going to do it by embracing and learning about these new technologies, being accepting of these new technologies, not thinking that, you know what, I'm a VMware admin, I'm set. I got 20 years left doing VMware administration. Even VMware more or less has come out and said that vSphere is baked, right? Maybe there'll be some new features in there, but I mean, 5.5, 6, 6.5, I mean, it is what it is. Maybe we can add, 2,000 vCPUs instead of, whatever the maximum is in 6.5 now, but it's pretty mature technology. So with that, what is Git? I finally get to one of my slides that would hopefully make people laugh, and I don't have, there we go. XKCD comic. So what is Git? Git is I can't read that on my screen. It tracks collaborative work on projects through a beautiful distributed graph theory tree model, right? Sounds pretty cool, right? I want to learn about GitHub. How do I use it? No idea, just memorize these shell commands and type them to sync your work up, and if something goes wrong, copy your work somewhere else, delete it, and grab a new GitHub. That's the funny version. It's source code management. It's a tool, publicly available. You can go and create an account there for free today. You can create a repository there for free today and put code up on it. So there's different types of version control. This is what's called a distributed version control system, where we've got our repository and we make copies of it. So you're going to make a copy of a repository on your local machine, you're going to work on it. And that doesn't affect what's on Github. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But really for today, back to the joke, just memorize these shell commands. Like that's the part I'm going to get into. There's a handful of them that you can use. It took me 2 years to remember these 3 commands. I don't know why I struggled with it so bad the first year, but I had to go, I would use it for a couple weeks, and I'd get distracted, and then I'd go want to put something else in GitHub, and I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that command, and I'd have to go pull up a blog post or something to do it again. So when we talk about version control, how many people have a folder on a server or on a laptop that looks something like this? More people need to raise their hands because everybody has this folder. Right, we've all had that. There we go.
There it is.
There is the table. Right, we've all got that folder of scripts, that folder of configuration files, maybe for a switch, version 1, version 1.1, version 2, version 2.2, version 2.2 edits, right? And maybe for the most part, if it's just me working on it, I know what's in, 1.6, because I'm the only one working on it. But what happens when you're in a group of other admins, engineers, developers who are maybe collaborating on that? What did, a guy I work with, Dean, right? I had this script and it made all these Active Directory accounts, and then he changed it and saved it as version 2. I don't know what he did to that. You can go ask him. That would be like the very human thing to do, I guess, but I don't like talking to people very much. So GitHub, what it's going to allow me to do is I'm going to be able to take that file, that script, and I'm going to have some, whatever's in there. And I want to make a change to it. I'm going to commit a new version. And part of that, you'll see, right, I put a commit message in there. So what did I change? I can links to what I updated code or new things that I've added to that script. So I can start to see that. And as I start to work on that with more people, it becomes much easier to understand what's changed in the history of that script, that config, whatever it is that we're working on. I totally thought I changed that. So the GitHub icon that went away, that would be github.com, right? I've created in red a repository, right? What we refer to as a repo. I didn't step on it that time. There we go. So I'm going to take and I'm going to clone that repo from GitHub onto my local machine. I can work on it. I can make changes. I can commit into my local repository, and then when I'm in a happy spot, I can push it all back up to GitHub for other people to consume. I mentioned GitHub is not equal DevOps, right? So, if you get, right? Get, we need more coffee over here. It is definitely one of the skill sets you need to have in your arsenal as you work. I had interviewed for a DevOps engineer job over the summer. And out of the 3 hours I was there, I think we talked about source code management and GitHub for about 2.5 of that with 3 different developers. So there's a lot of different theory on how to use GitHub. We won't get into that too much. We're really going to just focus on how you can use it today and maybe start to use it with some other people. But I also don't want anyone to get overwhelmed since it's potentially a new technology for you. When you're talking about DevOps, it's really more, to me, of a culture thing. So understanding how to work together with different groups, with different departments. But if you can speak GitHub, maybe you can go poke a hole in that silo that exists in your organization today with the QA team or with the developer to understand what they're doing and how you can better support them and work together. So reasonably easy to use, very easy to set up. Whatever operating system you're on, Windows, Linux, Mac, it's a command or two to set up. In terms of using it on your own, there's really 3 commands you need to know. And you can be pretty sufficient with it. You can keep track of the files you're working on, see what's changed over time as you've worked on that. And then it's reasonably easy to collaborate. That gets into some more culture and discussion and collaboration with other people on how you're going to collaborate collaborate with others on GitHub. There's different theories. People are generally particular about how you contribute code or information into their repository. And I've got some links for that later as well. So depending on your OS, it's a command line or two. Oh, that's the other thing. Everything I'm going to show you today is the command line. I am a Windows GUI noob from day one of my IT career, right? Command line is reasonably new in the last 5 years for me. I'm much more comfortable in it today than I was 5 years ago. So I'm not coming at this as somebody who's lived in the command line for 20 years. Definitely started in Windows with the GUI on top of the things I did. And there are GUI clients for Git. I find them extremely confusing. But that's just me. If you find one that you like and it makes sense to you and it works, totally cool. Like I said, I'm not religious on any of this stuff. If it makes sense for you and it works within what you're doing, that's great. But there are GUI clients out there. So the setup. Once you've done the install, there's a couple of commands that you'll need. And I refer to this just about every time I set up Git on a new computer because I'm not doing it that often. I set it up, I work for a while, and then something happens. And I'll make these slides available too for folks so you don't have to feverishly write down if I go past the screen faster than you can write. But it's basically git config with the -- global flag, and then username, and email address, and SSH keygen to make an SSH key. And we'll see in a little bit, there's two different ways to interact with GitHub, either over HTTPS or SSH, so whatever you're more comfortable with. From this point on too, other than the SSH keygen command at the bottom here, your commands are going to be the same on whatever operating system you're using that day. So if you run Windows on your laptop for the most part at home, git config -- global, same command. Git add, same command if you're on Linux. It's not going to change after you've done the install. The keygen setup, so the Git client for Windows comes with the shell utility. So you can actually go and run into this shell, like a Cygwin sort of shell, and run SSH keygen, because that's not something in Windows by default. So if you wanted to interact with GitHub over SSH, you would launch the shell in Windows first, and then you can run the SSH keygen command. Once I have that key, this is my GitHub interface here. I would go and I would add the public key to GitHub. Right, so now I've got my private key and my public key. I give them my public key, don't give them your private key. And also don't put your private key in like something that you're going to sync up to GitHub later, or Dropbox or anything like that, because there are public keys out there for all to have. Once I have it in there, it'll show up, right? So I added it to my home computer. And since I'm SSH, right, I'm going to SSH into GitHub. This is like a test command that they provide for you. So it's SSH-t git@github.com. And it will say, yep, hi Jon Frappier, you've logged in successfully. And now you can see the key up here, now that it's active, has changed from when I initially uploaded it from gray to green now that I've logged in. So sort of an easy way once you're getting it set up, like I put my key there, I logged in, yep, okay, cool. It knows who I am and it's using my key that I just added. I mentioned it's easy to use. These are the 3 commands, and I'll hang out here for a while if I can stop stepping on whatever that table is. Those are the 3 commands you really need as an individual to work on GitHub on your own. It's git add file name, so if I added a file name called my awesome script 1 dot whatever, right, you could git add with the file name. In the rest of this presentation, you'll see how lazy I am, and there's a shortcut. There's git add, and then you use a period instead of the file name, so that'll add any file that's changed. So if you've got 3 or 4 scripts in your arsenal in that directory that you want to sync up, and you made changes to all of them, GitHub add dot, it'll add all of them to your local repository. So you don't have to type 3, 4, 20 file names depending on what you're trying to add. Git commit will commit that into your local repository. We'll see that in a little bit, how you can determine if something's been added to your local repository or not. And then when you're content with it, it's git push, and that sends it back up to GitHub. So those are really the 3, if you're using GitHub, you're practicing today, you want to start putting your scripts there instead of having 75 different versions in a folder on your desktop. That's those are the commands you'll need to do that with. When you start to work with others, maybe on a shared repository that you have, there's these things called branches. And for the most part, think of a branch maybe as a new version of something. You have a script to do to create Active Directory accounts, but you want to add something to that, that script arsenal to reset passwords. You might create a branch in that repository to create this new password script. And you can now work in that branch. You can push those changes up to GitHub, but you're not going to affect what's called the master branch. So if that's something that maybe other departments, a help desk, other organizations you support use on a regular basis, you can make a branch, make changes. You can make changes to the file that's in the master repository. It doesn't even have to be adding a new file. You can be making changes to the existing files. But I can still, as a user, as another department, as somebody that relies on that repository, I can go out and get files that theoretically are known, good, working files. And in the background, I can be developing new features or making changes, adding whatever I need to add to that script, and not interrupt people using that file or files. A fork is another way that you would collaborate on a repository. So let's say that you work with somebody or a friend, or there's just a really cool project that you found on GitHub. Did anyone ever, I just want to feel slightly better about myself, did anyone ever just scour SourceForge back in the day for like cool utilities? Or there's at least a few. It was like my pastime, like, what's new on SourceForge today? This is kind of now evolved to, hey, what's new on GitHub today? Right, so if you find something that's really cool that you want to use, or maybe you even want to contribute to, there's a PowerShell project or a Python project or a utility that you found that's really useful for you, but their documentation sucks. Right? People throw documentation in GitHub all the time. If you're an Ansible user or a Pump user, their documentation sites are hosted on GitHub. You can go and suggest changes for their documentation and contribute those back to a project that maybe you found that's really useful on there. And you would do that by making a fork of the repository, and that makes a copy under your account. Right? I don't have access to the Ansible code base, even though it's out on GitHub, but I can make changes to their documentation or plugins, and then I can open what's called the pull request. And that's basically saying, hey, I want you to pull these changes I made into your repository, right? I've got a copy of it, I've worked on it, I've gone through whatever testing guidelines you as a repository owner want. I think these would be super helpful for people. So you would do that with a fork. And then merge, right? So the pull request is basically merging those changes into that repository or from another branch. So you would do a merge if you had multiple branches, which I'll show you in a little bit, or then merging those changes back into another repository if you forked it. So this is sort of like a very basic Git workflow. So your upstream repo and your origin repo are two that you would interact with. If you've created the repository in GitHub, your upstream and origin are potentially the same repo, right? But if you forked, right, step one, fork that. So the upstream repo might be some other person or some other organization that's created that repository, and you've gone and you've made a copy of it, so now that's your origin. And then you would clone it down to a local repository on your development machine, your laptop, whatever. And then you're just working on files in there, you're making changes, you're adding new features, documentation, and you're just committing right in that local repository, not affecting anything in the origin or the upstream. Then when you're happy with it, you can push those back, step number 4. And if it was a repository you forked, you would submit a pull request. And I mean, that's really, gets about that easy with those 3 commands. The fork, the pull request are things you'll interact with, and I'll show you here in a bit through github.com. So creating a repository, pretty basic. You log in, you create a new repository, give it a name. There is a character length, so I couldn't quite get my awesome new repo in here, so it's my awesome new repo. public or private, so you can create private repositories on GitHub that only certain people will have access to. That is a paid feature. I get no money if you sign up for those, so if you need them for your organization, totally cool, they're there, it's an option for you. If you work for a company that's maybe got more strict guidelines on where code or configuration files can be, GitHub is just based on Git. There's no reason you can't install Git on a server in your environment. If you use Team Foundation server, I believe in the most recent version, they've basically switched over to Git behind the scenes, so a lot of the TFS commands are still the same, but they've just got aliases to Git commands now, so if you wanted to use Git and you're using TFS that's in your environment today, there's another one called GitLab that you can download. There's an open source free version of, so again, if you want to be able to track changes and work across other people, other departments, you don't necessarily need GitHub. The UI will be a little bit different, but for the most part, create a new repository and have some different menus and such, but that'll still be the first step. There's also this little checkbox when you're creating a repository that says initialize this repository with a README file. So a README file provides information about your repository. So if I stumble across it on GitHub, and maybe it's got a reasonably decent name, like Ansible or Puppet, and I can derive from the repository name what it is, or maybe I've named it my awesome reap, and I have no idea what it's for. So the README file is a file that you can put in your repository, and GitHub will display that when you navigate to the repository. And you can put different types of formatting in there. You can use HTML, you can use Markdown in that README file. So if you wanted to have things in bold, bulleted lists, there's all sorts of things you can do in there. Once it's created, I mentioned that the second step, right? So my origin and upstream in this case are the same one. It's my repository. I want to clone it down to my local machine so I can start adding files to it. There is actually an editor on GitHub and in GitLab. There's a little web-based text editor. You could create files right in there and commit them into the repository all in there. But generally speaking, you're going to make a copy of that repository locally. Where sort of the distributed version control name comes from, is because now I've got a distributed copy of this repository in multiple places. And as I mentioned, you can do that with either HTTPS or SSH. Either one will work. For a while, a couple years ago, EMC blocked SSH outbound at the office, so I had to use HTTPS all the time, right? So if you're in an environment that doesn't allow SSH by default, HTTPS is another way you can pull and push files back up. That's way harder to see on here than it was for me, but the command is basically git clone. Git clone, and then I grab the link from here, whether it's HTTPS or SSH. It's git clone that URL. Paste that into my command line, and it's going to download all of the files that are in my repository, which in this case, the only thing I have right now is this README file, since I opted to initialize my repository with that file. And right now, my awesome repo, that's all I've got there. Another cool thing on the Windows client that I didn't mention is it does add some Linux-ish functionality. I don't know if I don't keep up with PowerShell as a matter of habit, so maybe it's a PowerShell thing more than anything else, but things like ls work after you install at least as of 2 or 3 years ago when we started committing this, I couldn't do ls and other things in PowerShell. After I installed the Git client, I could, which made me reasonably happy because I was Windows at home and Linux at work. So I can list out my repositories, and you can see my awesome new repo is now on my hard drive. The git status command. So this will give you information about your repository. So if you kind of lost track of where you were, if dinner came and went and you fell asleep, or something cool happened and you just walked away, or you got bored of it, you want to see where your repository is at, git status is the command you'll run. So in this case, it tells me my branch is up to date with my origin back on GitHub. In this case, I've gone and I've made some changes to my README file. Again, sorry about the projector, it's super hard to see there, but in red, it tells me that I've got a modified file. right? So if I run git status again after I make changes, or if I make changes and I go back, I'm not quite sure what the status is of my repository, I can see that I have uncommitted files in my local repository. So I've made some change, but I've not added that to my local repository yet. Git add period, I told you I'm lazy, so I'm not going to type git add readme.md every time I make a change to it. So git add period. And then if I do git status again, sorry, it's hard to see on the screen, the status of that file is now green instead of red. It's still modified. I haven't pushed that back up anywhere, but I've added that into my local repository. I can now commit that file if I'm ready to do so. When you're good, you've got the changes in your file, in your script, whatever it happens to be, your iOS code. Is it still iOS on a Cisco switch? That's how long it's been since I worked on a Cisco switch. And XOS now, probably more than likely. Git commit -m, and actually there should be quotes around the message. So if you did git commit m like that, I have on there, that's bad. It'll give me an error. Just slap some quotes around that. Alternatively, and I don't know why, if anyone wants to care to tell me about it later on, it seems to get fairly religious on git commit, whether you use the -m or not. Whatever works for you is kind of where I'm at. So if you did just git commit, it will take you into your default text editor and you can type your commit message, or you can do git commit -m for message and add your commit message. Like I said, it seems to be fairly religious. If you're working with other developers, if you're contributing towards a repository, a public project, they'll have guidelines on how they want you to do things. Just check with them, so people don't get angry over something like that. And once I've committed it, I can push it. Git push. It's going to shove it back up into my GitHub repository for me. Now, in this case, the way I've gone through it, like just using the very basic commands, I've not done any branching, I've not done any forking. I'm going to overwrite whatever was in my GitHub repository. So if I made changes to that file and I missed a semicolon, my loops don't quite work the way I thought they would, anyone else that relies on that file or wants to pull it down, they're going to get whatever doesn't work in that script. So that's sort of where branches come in. Right, I can make changes. I've not fully tested something yet. It's in my branch. They can still go to master and use that, the files that were in that repository. So there it is. I added some notes to this repo. Right, I made my change to my README file. I added it in to my local repository. I committed it, -m or not, and then I pushed it back up to GitHub. So slightly a little bit beyond the basics, right? This is not stuff you necessarily need to do today, unless you're going to go work with somebody straight away. Then you may want to consider some of these things like branches. So when I'm in my repository, you'll notice that I've got this little button here, this little branch pull down. That will show me a list of all of the branches that are in my repository. By default, you'll always have master. And if I want to create a new branch, right, working locally, git branch and then the name of the branch that I want, and that will create a new branch for me. I can do git status again, that's going on in your repository, and you can see branch master's up to date. I'm working in origin master still, so now if I want to go into that branch and start making changes, we do what's called a checkout. So git checkout, then the name of the branch. You could have multiple branches, maybe. Some people like to do branches based on features, so you might have a branch that says add password reset option. You might have another branch that says add group membership option. You might create different branches for different features. You might create branches for different versions of that. Again, check with the person who owns the repository or the other people in your group. This is where it's really more of a collaborative decision on how you want to work on things. Do I want features? Do I want version numbers? Whatever that happens to be. Now, if I were to git status after I've done a checkout, you can see right there on branch development. So there's my new branch. I've switched over to that. I can now start making changes in that branch. So I added a file called cool Ansible stuff, because I'm also an Ansible fan in my spare time. Right, I've done a git commit. Notice I didn't use the M there. Right, so I don't have my commit message after that. That's just the other way you can do it. It popped open VI. I made some changes. I managed to actually save the change in VI and get out, and then I'm back in my command line. Now I can, when I want to push that local branch I've created, right? I've created it locally. GitHub has no idea that it exists. It's on my local repository. You've got to tack some extra stuff at the end of your git push command. So I want to git push to my upstream origin, right? Where my repository is, and the name of the branch. So just a little bit extra there, and that will push that branch and everything in that branch up to GitHub. If I switch back now, in addition to master, which again you'll always have when you create your repository, you've got master, there's my development branch. And you can see it was created when I was doing this. I was taking screenshots right away, so created a minute ago. And here's the differences in the repository. So if I'm looking at master up on the top here, I only see the README file, that file that I originally had in there. I made some changes, I pushed that up, I can see that file. So if Dave, who I can't remember his name, goes to my GitHub repository, he's going to see the README file. That's what he needs. I know that works. My cool Ansible stuff, I'm not quite sure that's working yet, so that's still in my development branch. So if I switch to the branch, I can see that file, I can code it, but I don't have it just yet in my master branch. I mentioned merging earlier in some of the Git basics. So this is where you would merge your branches together. So I've finished developing or configuring whatever I want in that new file. I want to switch back to master because that's where I want to merge it to. In this case, you can switch to another branch and merge it. I've switched back to master, git merge in the name of my branch, and then git push, and now everything will be in my master branch, right? So I'm looking at master, but now I can see both files here because I've merged those and pushed that back up to GitHub. I started talking about branching theory, right? Whether you want to use versions or features or whatever. Hopefully I'm not going to get jumped afterwards for mentioning one as an option over another. I don't know if anyone's super religious about that here. Yes, no? I'm safe to walk out. So forking, another button that's available just right in the GitHub user interface. You've got that fork button there. So here's a project. If there's any PowerShell, Power CLI coders out there. This cool project from Chris Wall called Vester. So if you, Vester is a PowerShell tool that he and a few other folks have written to do configuration management on vSphere environments, right? So you want to learn to code and you manage vSphere environment today. I'm saying there's a pretty decent chance that at least one of those is true for the folks here. You could go and contribute back to this. Maybe you find that there's some configuration that you need to do in your environment that you think would be helpful. You could write the PowerShell code to do that and contribute it back to the environment. So you would do that first by making a fork, right? I don't have access to his repository on GitHub, even though it's public. In order to make changes to it, I would have to fork it. Look at this cool little image that comes up on your screen while it is creating the copy into your repository. And now, you see up there, right? Now it's under my account. So I've got a full copy of the Vester repository, but it's in my account. I can do whatever I want to it. I can rename it. I can break it. I can delete stuff, but it's not going to affect anyone going to Chris's copy that is available for people to pull down and use. There we go. So a pull request. This is where, here we go. Pull requests are how I can contribute changes from the copy of my repository that I have that I forked back to the original owner. So you would open what's called a pull request, and that pull request might be something as a typo. I've contributed documentation back to Ansible because it's, again, a tool that I use reasonably often. When they upgraded to version 2, they made some changes in parts of the documentation that were relevant to me, hadn't been updated yet. So it's like, if I'm using it, I'm pretty sure somebody else is using it. So I had a copy of it, I made the changes, I opened the pull request, and now the documentation on Ansible.com has my change reflected in there. So if somebody else wants to go do that, that would be listed there. I mentioned before, GitHub is public, right? When I say clean your code, I'm not saying make it tidy and neat so that everyone loves your code. I'm just saying don't put things like usernames and passwords in there, right? If you're using GitHub to keep track of your firewall configs or your router configs or your switch configs, and I just put those in there as is straight away, I'm sharing a lot of information. If I've dropped my private key into a folder, right, maybe I'm just going to do keep all my Git repos in my documents folder on Windows. That's where SSH is dumping my private and public key by default. It's going to create an SSH folder in there. So if I push that back up to GitHub, everyone's got both of them. So don't put sensitive data in your Git repo. Make sure that you've cleaned out any embedded usernames and passwords, keys, things like that. Maybe AWS keys, usernames, things like that. You might have in a script to do something. 3 commands, right? So if you learn those 3 today, go back to the office, start using them on a regular basis. Those are really the ones you need. When you start to do more things, you're not the only person in the world that is learning GitHub. I'm still learning GitHub on a regular basis. The Brown Bag and Matt Roberg, we started Commitmas 3 Christmases ago now. So it was originally just a bunch of people who were typing git add, git commit, and git push every day for 12 days. Right? We call it the 12 days of commitments. Cody Munch, who spoke here a couple years ago, worked for Rackspace, started the Brown Bag. Said to us last year, he's like, Commitmas is cool, it needs to be bigger, and it turned into the 30 days of Commitmas, so that was our 2nd season of Commitmas. We did, I'll have a link up here in a minute, we did live Brown Bags every night for the month of December, installing on different clients, using git push, using git commit, how to write commit messages, how to fork, how to merge, how to create branches. So we've got videos of all that stuff up there. There's a bunch of people that are still learning this stuff. Commitmas 2 specifically, a lot of the people that did those videos, I said, Kyle Rudy did a video on restoring files from Git, right? You wrote some file, you pushed it up there, and you're like, oh, I don't really want that there, that was a mistake. You can revert back, right? He had never done it before. But all of us learning together and sort of pushing each other, we were able to come up with all this content. So there's plenty of people out there who are ready to help. Just raise your hand and ask. These were a couple of new Commitmas videos that we did this year. So the first one, getting out of a mess. Another pun there. One laugh. Getting out of a mess. So you've done something to your GitHub repository, your file, your branch, or whatever. Katie goes over some tips on how to sort of back yourself out of that mess you've gotten yourself into. She's also got a really cool blog called ohshitgit.com. So I've said pretty much that verbatim, I think, at some point in my life. I talked about README files. So if you're going to create a repository, maybe you want to start a project like Vesta or something similar, or you want to contribute some Ansible roles or Puppet manifest back to the community. Mike Mars did a really great talk on how to write a good README file, the type of information you should have in there to help people understand your project, your repository, how they can support it and contribute to it. So that's another really good one. And then just Commitmas in general. If you don't celebrate Christmas, we've also got Commitmica new as of this year. So Commitmas sort of jumped the shark with the 30 days of live episodes. Got sort of beyond the basics. So Commitmica at this point is our original, 12 days, 10 days. We just do the basics: git add, git commit, git push, every day for a few days in December. So if you want to join us next December there, you can go to the Commitmas repo. We've got a Slack channel set up. Reasonably quiet now that Commitmas has died down, but people are still in there asking questions. We had a bunch of different projects that we worked on this year, so if you wanted to go in and sort of catch up on the history or ask questions, there's folks still in there as well. So I mentioned Commitmas 2. If you've got those basic commands down, but you need some refreshers on merging, on branching, on forking, on doing the install, Commit This To is the place to go. They're short episodes. They're between 5 and 10 minutes a piece. So if you're just like, oh man, I don't know, I forgot how to set this up, or I forgot how to commit this, or I forgot how to create a branch, Commit This To's your go-to at that point. There's also try.github.io, so you could actually play with those GitHub commands without having to install anything on your laptop. You can install it, create a project, start your own, and then this link at the bottom. This is a book really available as a bunch of Git commands and highly technical books if you want that there. And then, if you're a PowerShell coder already, Vester's a really cool project. Assuming you're also a VMware admin of sorts, you want to have some config management of your environment, you can go and check out Vester, maybe contribute back to that. If you're a budding or experienced Python coder, maybe you want to support Ansible. They're a pretty cool group of folks there. Next step for OSHA, that can't code coders. There's probably a project on there that could benefit you on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you can contribute some documentation back, start practicing, looking at README files, figuring out how to do branching and forking. Might be an option for you to contribute some documentation back to something, or you could learn to code something like FreeCodeCamp and start using GitHub to keep track of the work you're doing there. And with that, I'm all done. If you want to ask me a question on GitHub, at J Frappier, most of the time, if you tweet at Commitments or at bbrownbag, I'll probably see them, but it will probably be replied from me. LinkedIn, GitHub, and my blog.